Recently, I took it upon myself to recreate Televoid out of the loop, a game I created in my own game engine from scratch in C, in Godot. The goal being to learn Godot in a unique way. The challenge, you see, is that I must only code what is absolutely necessary and nothing more. The original game contained a bunch of external game data for levels, dialogues, animations, and minigames. And instead of just manually porting all of the data to Godot, re-scripting, recoding everything, I want to make importers for all that game data. Basically, the idea is that I won't have to code 90% of the game, just the base mechanics. This could also continue to make the game easily moddable and backwards compatible, as anything that was created for the original game could literally just be dragged and dropped into the Godot version and it would still work, it would still load. The original game had what I call Imv Files. They were short for Ian Music Video. I know, I'm clever. These files contained everything necessary to play out an interesting animation in-game. So this is what an Imv file looks like. It's somewhat similar to the OBJ file format, at being text-based and all. The idea is that I can create some entities, some elements that have a position, rotation, and scale, and a sprite. This would be the sprite name that would then point to a sprite in memory. I could change the sprite I wanted using D for data. This could also be used to change text, which I do in the intro over here. And you can see this element is actually a T. It's a text element, which uses a text instead of a sprite. All of these Ks are K keyframes, and I can set the type of the keyframe and what property it modifies, the time of which I want a certain value, that property to be. And it would basically create the array of keyframes, and then the Imv player would then play out these keyframes. Now what's really interesting is, now that I've managed to port this to Godot, I learned a lot about how Godot's importer actually works. So if I go here and grab my Imv files here, I made an importer that imports my Imv files as scenes because it creates a lot of new elements, a lot of new sprites and texts and whatnot. But now that everything's set up, and that Godot actually understands what my IMVs are, if I double click on it, and I click open anyways, it actually creates the whole scene when it imports. And if I go through this animation player here, you can see that it looks just like the game, and it literally just loads it using all of the keyframe data that is found in the Imv file. But once it's imported, Godot just sees it as an animation or as this scene. It's an abstraction of what my file was, and because it does that on import, if I were to package the game, this is what it now understands, and it wouldn't need to care much about the IMVs and the file type itself and loading on runtime. Although I think I could make that possible if I wanted to load things afterwards. But I just think it's so interesting to see this actually unveil, because in the original Televoid game, I couldn't see the animation until I ran the game, and even less, I couldn't play my animations backwards, which I find really cool. And the animation player in Godot is so good. It can do everything my IMV player could do, even really weird things like running functions. So here, it plays the background music, which I probably could have ported to use the animation player's own audio player, which it has, but I did it this way. Now you'll notice that the text is all the way over here and it isn't at all in the right place, but it does end up being in the right place. I'm still learning how labels work. But I have a scene manager here, and you can see that it looks just like it did in the original game. I even I programmed in the audio player on the top left, but whenever it plays an audio, bam, it just goes through that system. And with that in mind, I can see how I could make an importer for pretty much anything, because all it is turning file into abstraction that Godot can understand. Godot has a structure for meshes. The importer would just need to transform mesh data into Godot mesh data. That makes sense. Now, IMVs aren't the only thing that I got imported. In fact, I'll bring this back. I got some shortcuts here. So I can load in scenes, and all of the hotboxes are in the right place. So I used an add-on from Venen. He made a tile importer, or I'm not exactly sure. But they made a tiled importer, and that's where I started my adventure, where I saw a bit how their importer works, and I just modified it. I don't know if you know this, but Televoid, the original game, actually had documentation. So I say here, make sure to read the docs for more information. And you can see here that I have 4 pages, one for the dialogue, the IMVs, scenes, and scripting. So scenes, I've made an importer for, or modified tiled importer, so that person did most of the work, but I was able to get in the specifics and load in the data properly for like hotspots and triggers. But what's really useful now is I just made my own IMV importer, and this came in really useful. This is a comment, these are the properties that can be animated, and it's just fun that my own documentation became useful. And as long as any IMV file respects the rules set out here, they should be able to be loaded by both my game engine and Godot now. At first, when I was creating the IMV loader, I was importing them as animations. Animations that could just be loaded into an animation player. So freaking cool. Actually, seriously cool. When I clicked to add an animation in the Godot editor, it realized that my file type .imv was an animation, thanks to the importer. And that was done automatically, you could say. That's awesome. Anyway, thanks for listening to me geek out about Godot. Have a nice day.